When she opened the email, Evelyn Brooks saw only one cold, merciless line staring back at her, sharp as a blade pressed to her throat. Transfer $50,000. If you don't want your daughter's video spread across the internet. In that moment, Evelyn, 62 years old, a widow, a mother, understood that the blackmailer had aimed straight at the most sacred part of her life, her daughter. It was late at night. The living room was shrouded in darkness, lit only by the faint blue glow of the laptop screen, reflecting across Evelyn's trembling face. Her hand shook as she gripped the armrest, but her eyes drifted toward the corner of the room. There sat Sarah, 25 years old, her only child, curled up on the couch, her head bowed, hair falling across her face, hiding the swollen eyes that had wept for hours. Not a word, not even a sob, just silence. A silence so heavy, it felt as though the entire house had been swallowed by shadows. Evelyn drew in a long, steady breath. She knew this silence wasn't guilt. It was fear and shame. A fear strong enough to consume a young woman's life if left unchallenged. Slowly, Evelyn closed the laptop. Pain was etched deep into her expression. But behind that pain, something else began to awaken a fire. A quiet strength, a decision. Because Evelyn knew this wasn't just extortion. This was humiliation. This was a trap designed to prey on vulnerable young women like Sarah. Women too scared to speak, too ashamed to fight, too willing to let their dignity be trampled. She would not let that happen. Her voice, though quiet, carried like steel through the night, a vow not just to her daughter, but to herself. What the blackmailer doesn't know is that this mother will never bow, and I am ready for a battle they could never imagine. If you believe that justice can be found, even in the darkest corners of the internet, then make sure to follow this channel, because this is only the beginning. Evelyn Brooks had lived a quiet life. At 62, she was a widow of 10 years, a retired librarian who had found solace in her routines, morning tea on the porch, tending to her roses and reading mysteries by the soft lamplight of her living room. To the neighbors, she was gentle, dependable, perhaps even ordinary. But those who knew her well understood that behind her calm demeanor lay a spine of steel. Evelyn had built her life on principles: truth, fairness, and dignity. Her daughter, Sarah Brooks, was her pride. At 25, Sarah was studying to become a nurse, a career born from her compassion and patience. She had always been the kind of girl who listened more than she spoke, who offered help before being asked. Reserved, soft-spoken, and thoughtful, Sarah was the heart Evelyn had poured all her strength into protecting after Robert's death. Brian Carter entered their lives in Sarah's final year of college. On the surface, he was charming, handsome, in a disheveled way, with a smile that could melt insecurities. Evelyn had been cautious, as mothers often are, but Sarah, with her gentle heart, had believed in him. She believed his promises, his affection, and the dreams he painted of a future together. For a time, the Brooks household even held traces of laughter shared between Sarah and Brian. But beneath the charm, Brian hid his failures. He struggled to hold a steady job, always making excuses, blaming the economy, blaming bad luck. When Sarah graduated and began working in her nursing program, the imbalance grew clear. Brian became resentful, insecure, and manipulative. And then one night of misplaced trust and vulnerability, he did something that would forever scar Sarah. He recorded her without her consent. When the relationship crumbled, as Evelyn had quietly predicted, it left Sarah devastated, humiliated, and carrying a secret too heavy to share. At first, Evelyn only noticed the small changes. Sarah no longer sang along with the radio while cooking. She jumped at the sound of her phone buzzing, sometimes ignoring it altogether. Sleepless nights left dark circles under her eyes. She would lock herself in her room for hours, emerging with forced smiles that didn't reach her eyes. Evelyn asked gently at first, then firmly. But Sarah brushed it off. "I'm fine, Mom. Just tired." Evelyn knew it wasn't true. The truth came by accident. One evening, when Sarah left her laptop open on the kitchen table, Evelyn walked by and saw the screen. Her eyes froze on the message. Bold letters glared at her. Send $50,000 in Bitcoin within 48 hours, or your video goes public. Beneath it was a link threatening poisonous, promising humiliation. Evelyn's blood ran cold. Her hands trembled as she scrolled further. The sender's email was faceless, masked behind layers of encryption. But the words carried familiarity, a cruel arrogance that struck Evelyn with clarity. This wasn't just some faceless hacker in a distant country. This was Brian Carter. In that moment, the world shifted. The gentle routines of Evelyn's quiet life shattered, replaced by the harsh reality that her daughter was being hunted in the digital shadows. Sarah found her mother at the table, the laptop open, the message displayed. She froze, her breath catching her face turning pale. Tears welled up instantly. "Mom, I didn't want you to know." Evelyn turned to her, her voice steady, despite the storm inside. "Sarah, how long has this been happening?" Sarah shook her head, ashamed. "Weeks. He said if I told anyone, it would only get worse. I thought maybe if I ignored it, it would stop." Her words broke into sobs. "I was so stupid, Mom. I trusted him." Evelyn rose and pulled her daughter into her arms. "No, you are not stupid. You are not to blame for his cruelty." Her voice, though soft, carried the steel of conviction. "What he did was a crime, and he will answer for it." Sarah buried her face against her mother's shoulder, trembling. Evelyn held her tighter, her own heart breaking, but her mind sharpening. This was no longer just about a video. It was about power, control, dignity. And Evelyn Brooks, the quiet librarian, knew that she was about to enter a battle unlike anything she had ever faced. A battle not in libraries or living rooms, but in the dark, tangled maze of the internet, where faceless predators thrived and shame silenced victims. But Evelyn was not the kind of mother who bowed to fear. She would fight, not just for her daughter's future, but for her very soul. Evelyn Brooks did not sleep that night. She sat at the kitchen table long after Sarah had gone to bed, the cold glow of the laptop still haunting the room. The message burned in her mind, $50,000, or the world will see her daughter's shame. She knew what most victims did: pay, hide, stay silent. But Evelyn was not most victims. She was a mother, and silence was never an option. By dawn, she had made a decision. If Brian thought he could destroy her daughter's life with the click of a button, he had underestimated the wrong woman. Evelyn would fight him, not with panic, but with patience and precision. Her first call was to James Walker. James was not a polished corporate professional. He worked from a cramped office above a hardware store, surrounded by stacks of dusty monitors and wires coiled like snakes. In town, people knew him as the community watchdog, the man who taught seniors how to avoid phishing scams, the man who volunteered at the library to teach kids about online safety. When Evelyn walked into his office, James looked up from his screen, his sharp eyes softening when he saw the fear on her face. "Mrs. Brooks," he said, pulling out a chair. "Sit. Tell me everything." Evelyn slid the laptop toward him, her voice steady but heavy. "They're blackmailing my daughter, her ex-boyfriend. I'm sure of it. He has a video." James leaned forward, scanning the email with practiced eyes. His fingers tapped across the keyboard, pulling up layers of information Evelyn didn't understand. Strings of numbers, hidden paths behind the email's mask. "Email headers," he muttered. "Metadata trails. These guys think they're clever, but they leave footprints." He glanced up. "You're right. This isn't some overseas scammer. This came from inside the state. And the pattern, it matches accounts tied to Brian Carter." Evelyn's jaw tightened. Hearing the name confirmed was both a relief and a wound. "What do we do?" she asked. James smiled faintly. "We gather everything, quietly. Every message, every file, every trace. We'll build a wall of evidence so high, no one can deny what he's done." And so Evelyn began her secret preparations. For weeks, she documented every new message Brian sent. James taught her how to download the full email headers, how to track the IP history, how to preserve every screenshot without altering it. Evelyn, who once spent her days cataloging books, now cataloged her enemy's crimes with the same meticulous order. Meanwhile, James dug deeper. He found the source of the video file, a hidden cloud storage account, linked to a burner email. The metadata showed when it had been uploaded where, and even the device that had created it. The signature matched Brian's old laptop, one Evelyn remembered seeing in her daughter's room years ago. But Evelyn knew evidence alone wouldn't protect Sarah. She needed the law. That's when she turned to Clara Mitchell. Clara was a young attorney in town, sharp, ambitious, and unafraid to take on cases others avoided. Evelyn met her in a small cafe, the journal of collected evidence clutched in her hands. Clara listened carefully as Evelyn laid out everything: the emails, the threats, Sarah's silence. When Evelyn finished, Clara leaned back, her eyes narrowing. What Brian is doing is criminal. Cyber extortion, sexual exploitation, wire fraud. But we can't just run to the police with suspicion. We need airtight evidence, and we need to protect Sarah in the process. Evelyn nodded. That's why I've come to you. I want this done the right way. He thinks he's untouchable. I want him exposed. Clara's lips curved into a determined smile. Then we'll give him enough rope to hang himself. Together, they formed a plan. Evelyn would continue to play the part of the silent, helpless victim. She would not let Brian know she was fighting back. James would monitor his digital trail, collecting more proof each day. Clara would prepare the legal documents, ensuring that when the time came, the police would have everything they needed to act. Sarah, though fragile, began to see the quiet strength of her mother's resolve. One night, she whispered through tears, "Mom, aren't you scared?" Evelyn held her daughter's trembling hand. "Of course I am, but fear doesn't win battles. Patience does." And as she said it, her voice carried more than comfort, it carried prophecy. Because Evelyn Brooks understood something Brian Carter never would. Revenge was not rage. It was not a loud outburst nor a desperate cry. Revenge was patience. Patience to wait. Patience to gather. Patience to strike at the perfect moment. And when that moment came, Evelyn vowed Brian would never see it coming. The message arrived on a Thursday evening. Sarah opened her phone, her face pale, and handed it silently to her mother. Evelyn took it with steady hands, though her heart raced as her eyes scanned the words. 24 hours. Pay $50,000 or the video goes live on Facebook. No more warnings. It was signed with the same faceless email, but Evelyn could feel Brian's arrogance bleeding through every word. Sarah broke down, her voice a strangled whisper. "Mom, I can't do this anymore. Everyone will see. I'll lose everything. Maybe I should just leave town, change my name, disappear." Evelyn cupped her daughter's face, forcing her to meet her eyes. "Listen to me, Sarah. Running gives him power. Paying gives him power. The only way to win is to take that power back." "Do you trust me?" Sarah hesitated, tears streaming, then nodded faintly. That night, Evelyn and James Walker set their plan into motion. James tapped at his keyboard, tracing the digital trail of the ultimatum. "He thinks he's covered his tracks," James muttered. "But he's sloppy. This fake account is tied to another. In that account, his fingers danced, pulling up layers of hidden data. Links directly to Brian Carter's personal profile. Same IP, same device signature." Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "We've got him." But James wasn't done. He uncovered audio files left carelessly in Brian's cloud storage recordings of Brian boasting to one of his friends. One line made Evelyn's blood boil. "I'm not really going to leak it. I just want to teach Sarah a lesson for leaving me. Proof. Direct, undeniable proof." The next morning, Evelyn and Clara Mitchell arranged a meeting at the local police precinct. A small, windowless conference room became the stage. On one side sat Evelyn, Sarah, James, and Clara. On the other, Brian Carter, his smug grin plastered across his face, as if this were all a minor inconvenience. He leaned back in his chair, arms folded, eyes darting with false confidence. "So this is what it's come to," Brian sneered. "Dragging me here over lies, Sarah. You're embarrassing yourself." Sarah flinched, but Evelyn placed a hand on her arm, steadying her. Clara leaned forward, calm and sharp. "Mr. Carter, you've been accused of cyber extortion and harassment. Do you have anything to say before we proceed?" Brian smirked. Yeah, that it's ridiculous. You can't prove anything. Anyone could have sent those emails. Anyone could have made that video. You're wasting your time. The room was tense. The officers silent waiting. Evelyn reached into her bag and laid a folder on the table. Her voice was calm, but her eyes burned. This, she said, sliding the papers forward, is a record of every email sent. Full headers traced back to your home IP address. This, she continued, opening another file, is metadata from the video storage uploaded from your laptop, the same laptop you used to spend nights in my daughter's room. Brian's smirk faltered. And finally, Evelyn said, pulling out James's recorder, "We have your own words." James pressed play. The room filled with Brian's voice, arrogant and cruel. "I'm not really going to leak it. I just want to teach Sarah a lesson for leaving me." Silence. The kind of silence that crushes. Brian's face drained of color. He opened his mouth closed. It then stammered, That's taken out of context. It's fake. They're setting me up." But the officers exchanged looks. Clara's expression was sharp as steel. James leaned back, satisfied. And Evelyn? Evelyn sat tall. Unflinching, her eyes locked on the man who had tormented her daughter. For months, Brian had held power through fear, through threats, through the illusion that he controlled Sarah's fate. But in that moment, his power dissolved. His arrogance cracked. The predator had become the prey. Sarah sat frozen, tears streaming silently, not from fear this time, but from relief. She had just witnessed the shift the moment her nightmare began to unravel. The officer in charge finally spoke, his voice firm. "Mr. Carter, you'll be taken into custody pending further investigation. You have the right to remain silent." Brian's bravado collapsed. He shouted desperate, "This isn't fair! She ruined my life first. She deserved it." But his words only sealed his downfall. The more he spoke, the more pathetic he became. Evelyn reached for her daughter's hand, squeezing it gently. "It's over," she whispered. But inside, she knew this was just the beginning. Brian's arrest was one victory. But the larger network behind him, the faceless accomplices, the culture of online exploitation, still lurked in the shadows. Evelyn had lit the fire. Now the world was about to see it burn. Brian Carter's downfall didn't come in a single blow. It came in slow, cutting waves, each one stripping away another layer of the life he had built on arrogance and manipulation. The morning after his arrest, news spread quickly. At first, it was Whisper's neighbors talking in low voices at the grocery store, colleagues of Sarah, sharing the story in hushed conversations. But soon, the whispers turned into headlines. Local news outlets picked it up: man arrested in blackmail case against former girlfriend. Brian's name, his photograph, his shame. By noon, his social media accounts began to collapse. Platforms suspended his profiles for policy violations, but not before screenshots of his face, his posts, his boasts were shared across community groups. One Facebook thread labeled him the extortionist next door. Hundreds of comments poured in. "Unbelievable. He lived down the street from me. He's a predator. Glad he's exposed. I feel so bad for that poor girl. She deserves justice." And then came the cruelest cut. People who once praised him, laughed with him, drank beers at his parties began to denounce him. Karen Thompson, once a friend to both Brian and Sarah, posted publicly, "I can't believe I ever defended him. Brian is a coward who tried to destroy Sarah's life. He deserves everything coming to him." That single post spread like wildfire. Brian was released on bail, but when he walked back into his neighborhood, the air felt different. The friendly nods were gone. Doors closed when he passed. Mothers pulled their children closer. At the corner store, whispers followed him. "That's him, the one who blackmailed his girlfriend. Disgusting. He should be in jail already." Brian gritted his teeth, pretending not to hear, but their voices were knives. The humiliation deepened days later when he tried to host a birthday gathering at his apartment. He had invited his usual circle, promising drinks, music, and a good time. But when the night arrived, no one came. Not one knock on the door. He sat surrounded by untouched snacks and bottles of cheap liquor, scrolling his phone, seeing posts from those very same friends attending another party without him. His anger boiled. He posted online, raging about fake friends and a lying ex-girlfriend who ruined my life. But the comments backfired. "Stop blaming others. You did this to yourself." Classic abuser mentality. Sarah was brave enough to speak up. "You're just pathetic." One by one, people unfriended him. His digital world shrank until it was nothing but his own posts echoing into silence. Even errands became torture. At the supermarket, an elderly woman spat near his feet. "Shame on you. You humiliated that poor girl." Two teenagers snickered loudly, pointing as he grabbed milk. "That's him, the creep from the news." Every aisle felt like a courtroom, every stranger a jury. Meanwhile, Sarah watched from the safety of her home, her heart still fragile but slowly healing. For months, she had carried the crushing weight of shame, convinced the world would hate her if they knew. But now, she saw the truth. The world did not hate her. They hated him. The shame belonged to Brian, not to her. One evening, she scrolled through the community Facebook page and saw strangers defending her. "Sarah, if you're reading this, you're brave. None of this is your fault." For the first time in months, she smiled without forcing it. Evelyn noticed. "You're stronger now," she said gently, handing her daughter a cup of tea. Sarah nodded. "It feels lighter, Mom. Like the nightmare is still there, but I'm not trapped in it anymore." But Brian was. Trapped, cornered, unraveling. As the weeks dragged on, he tried to fight back. He reached out to his lawyer, insisting Sarah had set him up. He messaged old friends, begging them to believe his side of the story. Most ignored him. A few responded with scorn. "You filmed her without her consent. That's all I need to know." Bills piled up. Job interviews dried up when employers Googled his name. Even his landlord hinted that he might want to find another place to live once the lease expired. The walls of his world closed in. Brian had once believed he could control Sarah with threats, with shame. But now stripped of allies and reputation, he was the one controlled by public scorn, by legal consequences, by his own unraveling. The final humiliation came one Saturday afternoon. Brian walked into a local diner, hoping for a quiet meal. Instead, the chatter stopped the moment he stepped inside. A man at the counter sneered. "You're not welcome here." Brian clenched his fists. "I just came for food." The waitress shook her head, her voice firm. "Get out, Brian. You brought enough disgrace into this town. We don't serve men who prey on women." The room watched as he left, his head bowed, his pride shattered. For Evelyn, it wasn't about vengeance for its own sake. Watching Brian's downfall wasn't about enjoying his pain. It was about restoring balance. About proving to Sarah that justice existed, that the world could still stand with her. And for Sarah, each humiliation Brian faced was like another chain falling from her own wrists. Slowly, she reclaimed her laughter, her sleep, her voice. The girl who once hid in shame was beginning to walk tall again. The slow unraveling of Brian Carter was more than punishment. It was a mirror showing the community, and Sarah, that predators could fall, that shame could shift, and that the truth once revealed had the power to destroy lies piece by piece. And though Brian tried desperately to cling to the fragments of his old life, Evelyn knew the truth: he was finished. But in the darkness, she also knew this war wasn't entirely over. Brian's arrest was just the surface. The network he was tied to, the faceless predators hiding online, were still out there. And Evelyn Brooks was not finished. Not yet. The first blow of Brian's counterattack came not from a courtroom, but from the internet. Late one night, Sarah scrolled through her phone and froze. There it was, a post on a community forum written under Brian's name, but already shared dozens of times. "Sarah Brooks is lying. She made up everything to ruin me. She wanted money from me and is twisting the truth to play the victim. Don't believe her." Attached was a photograph of Sarah from college, cropped cruelly to make her look reckless, paired with words meant to poison every eye that saw it. Sarah's hands trembled. "Mom, people are going to believe him. They'll think I did this." Her voice cracked, terror flooding back into her chest like a wave. Evelyn took the phone, her jaw tightening. He's desperate. Lies are the last weapon of cowards. But even as she spoke, doubt clawed at her. Lies spread faster than truth. Evelyn had seen it before. By morning, the smear campaign had grown. Anonymous accounts parroted Brian's words. Maybe Sarah wanted money. Maybe she's not as innocent as she looks. Rumors sprouted like weeds, twisting the story, until strangers questioned whether Sarah had orchestrated the entire ordeal. Sarah stopped eating. She locked herself in her room, scrolling endlessly, every cruel comment carving deeper into her. "They'll never believe me now," she whispered to Evelyn through the door. "I should just disappear. It would be easier." Evelyn pressed her forehead against the wood, her heart breaking. "No, Sarah. Running gives him victory. We have the truth. That's stronger than his lies." But Sarah didn't answer. Meanwhile, Brian armed himself with new ammunition, a lawyer named Richard Blake. Blake was slick, expensive, and known for twisting narratives in court. He appeared on local radio, his voice calm, authoritative. "My client, Brian Carter, has been falsely accused. We have reason to believe Sarah Brooks fabricated these claims as retaliation for a failed relationship. The so-called evidence is circumstantial. This is nothing more than a smear campaign against an innocent man." The words spread quickly, repeated on blogs, whispered in workplaces, muttered in coffee shops. Sarah's older brother David flew in from another state when he heard how bad things had become. Sitting at the kitchen table, he looked at Evelyn with concern. "Mom, maybe it's time to stop. Sarah's breaking under this. You're breaking under this. Maybe walking away is better than fighting until we're all destroyed." Evelyn stared at her son, exhaustion written across her face. For a moment, she wavered. The weight of sleepless nights, of Sarah's fragile spirit, of her own aging strength, it pressed down on her chest. Could David be right? That night, Evelyn sat alone in her late husband Robert's study. His photograph sat on the desk, his familiar smile frozen in time. She touched the frame, her voice trembling. "Robert, I don't know if I can keep doing this. She's breaking. I'm breaking. Maybe it's too much." But as the silence filled the room, Evelyn remembered his words from years ago, words he had spoken when life was hard, and she wanted to give up. "The truth is never easy, Evelyn. But if you let it go, it disappears forever. And then lies win." The memory struck her like a flame in the dark. Tears filled her eyes, but resolve straightened her back. She whispered into the silence, "You're right. Lies cannot win. Not while I'm still breathing." The next morning, she found Sarah curled on the couch, hollow-eyed. Evelyn knelt beside her, taking her daughter's cold hands. "Sarah, listen to me. He wants you to believe you are powerless, but you're not. You are stronger than his lies. And I will not let him take your life away." Sarah shook her head weakly. "I don't feel strong, Mom." "You don't have to feel it," Evelyn said firmly. "You only have to hold on long enough for the truth to do its work." The world outside still buzzed with Brian's lies, Richard Blake's smooth interviews, and strangers who chose gossip over fact. Evelyn felt the storm raging, pressing harder with each passing day. But deep in her chest, she carried her husband's words. She would not let truth vanish. She would not let her daughter vanish. Even if the night grew darker, even if the fight cost her everything, Evelyn knew this patience, not rage, was her weapon. And in the deepest shadows of this crisis, she prepared herself for the dawn. The trial began on a gray Monday morning. The courthouse stood like a fortress of stone. In silence, its steps crowded with reporters, activists, and curious onlookers. Sarah clutched her mother's hand as they climbed those steps, her pulse hammering, her breath shallow. She had spent months drowning in shame and fear. But today she would face it head-on. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with tension. On one side sat Sarah, Evelyn, Clara Mitchell, and James Walker, their files stacked neatly before them. On the other sat Brian Carter, clean-shaven in a cheap suit, his eyes darting with nervous bravado. Beside him, Richard Blake exuded polished confidence papers in hand, his smirk unshaken. The judge called the court to order. The charges echoed through the room: cyber extortion, unlawful surveillance, harassment, fraud. Each word struck like a drumbeat, the list of crimes stretching like a shadow over Brian's head. Richard rose first, smooth as oil. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, my client is the victim of a vindictive plot. The prosecution would have you believe he masterminded a campaign of blackmail. But where is the undeniable proof emails can be fabricated? Metadata can be manipulated. At its core, this is a breakup gone sour, nothing more. Murmurs rippled through the room. Sarah's chest tightened. Evelyn squeezed her hand firmly. Patience, she whispered. Then it was Clara's turn. She stood calm but fierce, her voice carrying conviction. This case is not about a breakup. It is about abuse of trust, about digital violence, about the exploitation of a young woman. And we will show you proof so clear it cannot be ignored. One by one, the evidence was unveiled. James took the stand explaining email headers and IP addresses in terms even the jury could follow. He showed how every threatening message traced back to Brian's device, how the metadata aligned with files uploaded from his laptop. Charts, timelines, technical forensics, all piecing together a picture Brian could not escape. Clara played the recording, Brian's own voice dripping with arrogance. I'm not really gonna leak it. I just want to teach Sarah a lesson for leaving me. The jury leaned forward. The room went still. Brian's face drained. Richard objected, his voice rising, but the judge overruled. Then Sarah herself took the stand. Her voice trembled at first, but as she spoke, strength grew in her words. She described the fear, the sleepless nights, the humiliation. She looked at the jury and said softly, I thought I would never escape his control. But I learned something: shame belongs to those who do wrong, not to those who survive it. Her words hung in the air, heavy with truth. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears, pride swelling in her chest. When the defense tried to tear Sarah down, Evelyn braced for her daughter to crumble. But Sarah didn't. She answered, firmly, no longer the broken girl hiding in her room, but a woman standing in her truth. By the trial's end, the case against Brian was overwhelming. The jury returned swiftly, guilty on all counts. The gavel fell. The sentence rang out: years in prison, fines, mandatory registration as an offender. Brian's bravado shattered. He screamed, cursed, swore it wasn't fair as officers dragged him away in chains. His network of online accomplices uncovered through James's digital trail were also arrested, each charge stacking like bricks on a crumbling wall. For Sarah and Evelyn, it was over. When they stepped out of the courthouse, the crowd erupted, not in scandal, but in support. Applause, cheers, and signs reading "Justice for Victims" waved in the air. Reporters shouted questions, but Sarah only clung to her mother, whispering, We did it, Mom. We really did it. Evelyn smiled through her tears. No, Sarah, you did it. You found your voice again. In the weeks that followed, the victory transformed into something greater. Evelyn and Sarah refused to let the story fade into another headline. With Clara's help and James's expertise, they launched the Sarah Brooks Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to helping victims of online exploitation. The foundation partnered with local police to host workshops teaching young people about digital safety, about the dangers of trusting too easily, and about how to fight back if they became targets. At the first seminar, Sarah stood before a crowd of nervous teenagers. Her voice still wavered, but her message was clear. I lost months of my life to fear because I thought I was alone. But no one has to fight this alone. You are not powerless, and you are not to blame. The applause that followed was not thunderous, but warm, steady healing. For Evelyn, watching her daughter transform from victim to advocate was the truest victory. Justice was not just about Brian rotting in prison. Justice was about Sarah standing tall, reclaiming her dignity, and using her pain to protect others. Late one evening, Evelyn sat on the porch, the foundation's first pamphlet in her hand. She looked up at the stars, whispering into the night. Robert, we did it. She's free. She's stronger than ever. And in the quiet, Evelyn felt peace. Not because the battle had been easy, but because it had been worth it. Justice had been served. But more than that, a legacy had been born. The storm had passed. The courtroom battles, the sleepless nights, the suffocating fear, they were now memories, echoes of a fight that once consumed every breath. For Evelyn Brooks, the silence that followed felt unfamiliar. One evening, sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of tea, she stared at the steam rising and thought, this is what peace feels like. It wasn't triumphant or loud. It was quiet, solid, unshakable. When friends came by to congratulate her, to say how brave she had been, she always smiled politely. But in her heart, she knew the truth. Her victory wasn't about defeating Brian Carter. It wasn't about seeing him in handcuffs or hearing the guilty verdict echo in the courtroom. Her true victory was something deeper. It was watching Sarah laugh again, real laughter, light and unforced, the kind Evelyn feared she would never hear again. It was seeing her daughter sleep soundly, without nightmares, walk confidently, without glancing over her shoulder, speak without shame weighing down her words. Late one night, Evelyn opened her old leather journal and wrote slowly, carefully. Victory is not in crushing the enemy. It is in reclaiming the parts of ourselves we thought were lost forever. Across the hall, Sarah sat by her window, pen in hand, journaling for herself. For months, she had avoided writing, afraid that putting thoughts to paper would make them real. But now her words flowed freely. I am not afraid anymore. I understand now that silence only protects those who harm. The truth may hurt, but it heals. The truth is always stronger than shame. As she wrote, tears slid down her cheeks. Not tears of despair, but of release. Sarah's reflection wasn't just about her own survival. She thought of other girls, other women who might be trapped in the same shadows she had once known. She thought of the weight of silence, how it chained people more tightly than any prison. And she vowed that her voice would never be chained again. Evelyn often spoke to her daughter about the lessons hidden in their ordeal. Greed and betrayal, she would say, may grow bold in the dark, but they cannot live in the light. Lies are fragile things, Sarah. They always crack under the weight of truth. Sarah would nod, her eyes shining. And the internet people think it's endless, uncontrollable. But even there, mom lies leave trails, and justice can follow those trails. They learned together that technology wasn't the enemy. The enemy was exploitation, cruelty, the misuse of power. And the solution wasn't retreating from the world, it was facing it with knowledge, patience, and courage. Evelyn reflected often on Robert's words, the ones that had carried her through her darkest night. The truth is never easy, but if you let it go, it disappears forever. She realized now that the truth wasn't just something you spoke. It was something you lived, protected, carried forward. Neighbors who once whispered now approached Evelyn with gratitude. Mothers thanked her for standing up, for showing that silence wasn't the only path. Teachers invited Sarah to speak in classrooms where students sat wide-eyed, realizing that online threats weren't just distant stories. They were dangers close to home. And through it all, Evelyn felt a quiet pride. Not pride in destroying Brian, but pride in surviving him, in protecting her daughter's spirit, in proving that even ordinary people, a retired librarian, a young nurse, could face down cruelty, armed only with patience, truth, and love. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Evelyn and Sarah sat on the porch together. The air was warm, the cicadas humming, the world gentle for once. Evelyn spoke softly, almost to herself. We didn't win because we beat him. We won because we took our lives back. Sarah leaned her head against her mother's shoulder, whispering. And because we chose truth over silence. The reflection of their journey was not bitter, but cleansing. The past remained, but it no longer defined them. What defined them now was resilience, courage, and the knowledge that no betrayal, no humiliation, no crime could erase the bond between mother and daughter or the power of truth. And so as they sat in the fading light, both knew their story was no longer just about them. It was about every person who had ever been silenced. It was proof that silence could be broken, and when it was, the world could change. The fight was over, but Evelyn Brooks knew that every victory needed a legacy. What they had endured could not simply fade into memory. It had to become something more, something that would outlast them both. One evening, Evelyn called Sarah into the study. The room was warm with lamplight, the shelves lined with books that had been her companions for decades. On the desk lay a leather-bound journal, its cover worn, its pages filled with Evelyn's handwriting. She placed her hand on it as Sarah entered. "This," Evelyn said softly, "is our story." Sarah looked at the journal puzzled. "Your notes?" Evelyn shook her head. "Not just notes. I wrote down everything, every fear, every discovery, every moment we thought we would break. This is more than a record. It's a guide. A reminder that no matter how dark it gets, truth and patience will always find the light." She pushed the journal toward her daughter. Sarah hesitated, her hands trembling as she picked it up. She flipped through the pages, her mother's steady script, flowing across them, raw descriptions of sleepless nights, careful details of evidence collected, confessions of doubt and hope. Tears filled Sarah's eyes. "Mom, this is your heart." Evelyn smiled gently. "It's yours now. One day when you're lost, when you wonder if you can keep going, these words will remind you of what we survived. And maybe they'll help someone else too." From the drawer, Evelyn retrieved a small silver pocket watch. Its surface was scratched, its chain tarnished, but its tick was steady, alive. She pressed it into Sarah's palm. "This belonged to your father. He carried it every day through good times and hard. To him, it was a reminder that time is precious, that we cannot waste it on anger or regret. Carry it, Sarah. Let it remind you to use your time to build, to heal, to love." Sarah closed her hand around the watch, holding it to her chest. She remembered the sound of its ticking from childhood, how Robert had checked it before heading to work, how its steady rhythm had comforted her as a little girl. Now it carried a new rhythm, the beat of resilience. Evelyn then handed Sarah an envelope sealed and worn. "I wrote this for you," she said, her voice unsteady, for the first time that night. Sarah carefully opened it and unfolded the letter. In Evelyn's familiar handwriting, the words struck like both balm and fire. "My dearest Sarah, never let shame silence you. Never let fear steal your voice. The world may try to break you, but remember, your strength is not in never falling, but in rising again and again. Carry our story not as a wound, but as a torch. And when you meet others who are lost in the dark light, the way for them. With love, Mom." Sarah pressed the letter against her chest, her tears flowing freely. She looked at her mother with a mixture of gratitude and awe. "How did you stay so strong, Mom?" Evelyn took her hand. "Because I had to, and because I had you. Now it's your turn, Sarah. Strength isn't something we keep. It's something we pass on. The final gift was not an object, but a place." Evelyn led Sarah to the living room window, where the lights of their old family home glowed warmly against the night. "This house," she whispered, "is more than wood and brick. It has carried us through joy and sorrow. It holds your father's laughter, my tears, your childhood. It is memory, it is love. And now it will hold something more." Together, they transformed the house into a space for others. On weekends, the living room became a workshop for teenagers, where James taught about online safety, where Clara spoke about legal rights, where Sarah herself shared her story. The Brooks home, once a sanctuary of private pain, became a beacon of public healing. Every photograph on the wall, every creak of the floorboards, every bloom in the garden now carried new meaning. The house was no longer just for them, it was for everyone who needed hope. As Sarah stood in the doorway of a workshop one afternoon, watching a group of nervous young women listening intently to her words, she felt the weight of her mother's gifts: the journal, the watch, the letter, the house. They were not just heirlooms, they were torches, and she carried them now. That night, Evelyn watched her daughter from the porch, her heart full. She had given Sarah everything she could: her wisdom, her faith, her legacy. And in Sarah's steady voice, in her fearless eyes, Evelyn saw the truth: the torch had been passed, and the flame would not die. The sun dipped low, painting the Virginia sky in amber and rose. Evelyn and Sarah sat side by side on the porch of the Brooks home, the house that had witnessed their tears, their battles, their victories. The cicadas hummed in the distance. The air warmed, the world quiet. For the first time in what felt like forever, their faces carried peace. Sarah leaned against her mother, the pocket watch ticking softly in her hand, its rhythm steady, reassuring. The journal lay on the small table beside them, its pages filled with the story they had survived. Evelyn watched the light fade across the horizon and whispered, "We've come so far, Sarah. And look at you now. You're not just surviving, you're leading." Sarah smiled faintly, "Because you showed me how." For a long moment, they simply sat in silence, breathing in the stillness. The storm of fear, the chaos of lies, the noise of courtroom battles, all had fallen away. What remained was love, resilience, legacy. The camera of their story pulls back here, leaving mother and daughter as silhouettes against the glowing sky. And then the narrator's voice enters. Not Evelyn's, not Sarah's, but one that speaks to us directly, echoing the question that lingers in the heart of every parent, every listener. And what about you? If one day your child was blackmailed online, would you remain silent? Or would you rise to protect them? The question hangs in the air, heavy and personal, daring each listener to imagine their own answer. And finally, the voice softens an invitation. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment and share your thoughts. And if you believe justice should never be hidden, press like so that others may see. And remember that truth always finds its way. The screen fades to black, the last image lingering, Evelyn and Sarah on the porch, faces calm, the house glowing warmly in twilight. A symbol of survival, of courage, of the quiet but unbreakable strength of a mother's love.